So now what we find is the connection to the Lemurian Empire obviously was a major connection with the constellation of Orion, as that information already proved that the Lemurian Empire was majorly it was excuse me, I'm talking for a while now, but the Lemurian Empire was seated within the area we know as Angkor Wat or Cambodia. This, of course, is the home of the darkest level of magic known as Sakyat. So what happens is that this, of course, is where the whole Tomb Raider mythos comes from also. And you see that Angelina Jolie got the Sakyat tattoo on her back. But this entire constellation of Orion and the Nephilim coming to Earth by way of Venus, because, of course, they have to they have to incarnate into physical bodies, which is what Venus does. And then you find this priestcraft set up here on Earth where people are instructed, obviously the indigenous people, are instructed to build these monuments and temples and begin to populate rapidly. And then there grows out of all of this a very deeply disturbed slave nation, which actually is the state that many are existing in right now, which is the damage of what has happened in the past with our interaction with the beings from Orion. So what you have here, obviously, is, again, the building of the Orion temples. And then out front, they're still recognizable, but you'll see the Naga. Now, it's important to understand the Lemurian symbolism, because all the symbolism later on can't even be understood unless you decode the Lemurian symbolism, because the Lemurians just went underground and then re-emerged under different symbolism and used someone else as their front man or woman or dog or whatever kind of entity they were using. But originally it was under the serpent, and the serpent, it was 7 serpents synonymous with the 7 planets, the 7 spiritual vehicles, in the chakras. You have to understand that there's not just 7 planets obviously in space, but there's 7 planets that are primarily, or 7 celestial bodies that are primarily known. And this, of course, gives us and used within the occult, and this gives us the 7 days of the week. But we obviously see that Monday, this is why I say that the 7 chakras don't correspond to 7 planets. They correspond to 7 celestial bodies, because Monday is a moon. And so you'll see that you can probably find the connection between many of these entities within the connection of the planetary systems, as far as the ones that they're idolizing: Mars, Venus, Mercury, Uranus, Saturn, Neptune. These planets pretty much run replete within this symbolism, but are not all of the planets in the solar system. So you can see obviously that they're choosing to partialize the world with just this specific part of the story. And here we have again a temple of Angkor Wat, or temple in Cambodia being lined up to Angkor Wat. Now, here's obviously what was going on with the Lemurian Empire. As I said before, it's been about war since the beginning. Some of the tools that were used for the war were encrypted under symbols of a bow and an arrow. Here you actually do get a glimpse. As I said, it doesn't appear that many of the entities that were living here during that time looked completely like how we look now. They tend to carry some type of animalistic or even ham or pork-like face, or boar type face, and human bodies. So what you have here is you have them utilizing a weapon, obviously what we would call today a weapon of mass destruction. And this is what I believe eventually led to the first sinking of the Indus Valley, because when you look deeper into the Angkor Wat story, you'll find that the reason why the actual place became desolate was the water and irrigation system became completely dysfunctional, and all of the water began to basically become mismanaged and got infected, and then people began to catch and break out in diseases, and it was just a mess in Angkor Wat. But you just have to check out a lot of the Discovery Channel stuff on it with Shri Varman and all the energies that were being evoked. We find here again another one-waff or wonder weapon being used by the Aryan. You see the actual Psi, which is now comes to us as a fleur-de-lis, being used also. This is the Psi as in Scion. This is the Shin symbol. The Shin is also synonymous with the moon. You see here even an M, but we won't read into that too deeply. But we find here again that the Naga were engaged in a battle with each other and with Asuras and with Aryans, and it wasn't a good side. If people are looking to, well, I need to jump on one side and fight with them, they just were locked in an ever-going conflict until one of them decided to get out of it. So it sounds like the same kind of story that we're having today. So you'll be locked into this conflict with this world, and until you decide to get out of it, and that's just how it works. So as we go on, again, the major wars of the Lemurian empires, I really got this here just to show you that the Nagas had as their leader Ananta. He was the first of all the Nagas. So if you look at this name An, you'll find in the Sanskrit language, An is repeated several times, Anananda. You'll find it, you just look into the Sanskrit language, and then you'll find the connection between the An and the Nagas and the Anunnaki, because all the words are synonymous with the same group of beings. You'll find also the same thing going on, modern day worship. Meaning that when you go into these countries where they still have pyramid systems, they still see it necessary and divine to worship and to believe in what the pyramid stood for, but they never ask at any point, what does it really stand for? Or maybe, how should I put it? Basically, they never get the knowledge, and they don't pursue the knowledge enough to understand the difference between what they've been told versus the truth. So just remember, all these kind of cyclopean structures are the signs of civilization. When humanity used to live as hunter and gatherer, etc., they used to roam around and really do what they want and bask in the glow of the garden, because really the earth was completely fertile. There was flowers and plants and fruit and all sorts of things here. So when this pyramidal system starts to come into play, this is actually the arrivals itself. So if you want to know when was the alien invasion, it already took place. As we see also, for those that love to argue about the actual meaning of the word Lucifer and, want to make Lucifer the good guy. I've noticed this going on these days, that people are trying to interpret Lucifer in various ways. But again, in Tibet, this comes from, of course, a very old book. You can still see based on the spelling. But in Tibet, the springs, rivers, and lakes are still ruled by the Naga, demigods, or Lu. This is a time where you get the word Lu, which is synonymous with Li, which is synonymous with Li, of course, is a popular Asian last name. Li, Lu, La, Lo, basically L with every vowel behind it equals the Naga, because the Nagas are the elves, sometimes called elves. So let's keep going here. We find Ifrit basking in the garden, serpent on the tree here. And then you'll see that this is obviously an old depiction of some of the same entities, also known as the Asuras, hanging out, basking around, getting taken care of. And of course, to the standard size human, there was a great fear of many of these entities. And that's why there was a war at a certain point, because as these entities began to mate with the indigenous, there came out children that were divinely blessed, I would say, or the gift and the curse. Sometimes you can look at it with these same gifts of these gods, especially with fire and being able to bring up Kundalini or serpent energy. And so this whole empire of Lemuria rolls into a massive conflict with their children, which was actually the Atlanteans. And so for the record, if those that want to know the melanin dominant and the melanin recessive connection, is that the father and mother and their children. So what you'll find here is you see here again, this is the Naga of the Lemurian Empire. You find the conch shell, which is a symbol of Phi. If you notice, when you look into a conch shell, you see the spiral. You see it being offered as wisdom. This is how the serpent became synonymous with wisdom. You find here 5 instead of 7 Naga, which is key because this particular entity actually stands for Venus. So we find that connection. You see the body is terminated in a serpent shape. Again, we find more Naga here. We find Fuxi, which is in the Japanese and Chinese empires. Let me reset this thing here. But you'll find that they also stylized their first kings and queens, of course, as being serpents, or at least terminated in serpent. More Naga. Obviously, they were stylizing the Naga everywhere. It was a symbol of worship. Wherever it was put, it meant that the priesthood was there. Of course, you see the serpent is also on the forehead in the Egyptian priesthood. And when you came to these places, it generally meant that you were going to be inducted into the priesthood. And all of these evangels, which were these go-betweens between God or the Most High and you, were intercessors, or sometimes seen as messiahs, etc., but really they were filters to the truth. And of course, so much more expansion existed beyond this. And you see there's signs here, because as I've been reading the secret to this sign, which I'll just reserve for when I finally finish reading that entire script, but it is related to ophilatria. And actually, I believe it's also related to opening up the gate in itself. So a person also determines what comes across the gate by how they are. You also find here, obviously, an encounter. This is a more modern painting, but an encounter between the Native American and the reptilian. This picture I was seeing earlier was kind of out of place, but and it was duplicated. But again, here's the one I was looking for. This is Brahma. Now, the interesting thing is that this Brahmic tradition, which is obviously the Lemurian tradition, as I said earlier, is moved then to what we call the Western world. And one of the Brahmas, and this is what we need to really see, is that one of the Brahmas started migrating heavily into the areas that we're calling Native America. Now, the Brahmas went in different places, Northern America. But you'll see here that the symbolism of the Brahmins always is the swastika, the 8-pointed star, the arrow, the serpent, and the bell with the horns, because remember, bell is Baal. And of course, this tool is used as an evocation or to ring the frequency of Baal, as they did at the Olympics. So we find here in the mystical books, it says that this is the symbols and the sign or what you see when you encounter a demon. Now, this is actually stylized exactly after Solomon, who of course is Cassiel, who's the angel of Saturn, which of course we see the connection, and we see the beard, we see the crown of kingship, because this is also synonymous with CAIN or Khan. And then we of course see the broken pentagram. Now we're entering into the Atlantean Empire, or the ones who love to keep themselves separate. They, of course, live in many cases in the island areas they lived. And this was so that it was for ease of access to many of the areas that they were, in most cases, terrorizing. And they would leave from these areas and they would go into different countries, and they would bring their priesthood and their priestcraft. And they would also be on warships and cherubims and different vehicles that people would be astonished in seeing. And so it'd be just like today if someone rolled up to you in a Bugatti or a Lamborghini and said, hey, jump in. You got to ask yourself, would you really jump in? So that's what was going on with the indigenous people. They were fascinated with what these Atlanteans had collected over time in pillaging different empires. We find also the king of Tyre, because here's where you get the whole idea of individuals crossing the sea in order to get to these particular areas. And this is why they were often depicted as having wings or coming from the sky. But in reality, most of them crossed over in boats. Now, this is the king of Tyre, which of course is mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible. You see him on the Leviathan, or the beast, the sea beast, and you see the bow in the hand once more. As I said, that symbolism is replete, and there appears to be an Ouroboros around this coin and a dolphin here. So this, of course, is also Dionysus, is synonymous with the king of Tyre. You find here how, and this is not the greatest picture, but you find here Brahma and Saraswati. And as I said earlier in the conversation, Brahma is translated into the English Bible as Abraham or Abram. He becomes Abraham when he becomes the father of the tribe of Ham, by the way. And so his wife Sarah, Abraham and his wife Sarah, are Abraham and Saraswati. So it lets you know that this Lemurian tradition and Hindu tradition, etc., crossed into the Bible a long time ago. So it allows you to see very clearly that obviously if Brahma and Saraswati are here, then Krishna or Christ would also have to be here. Meaning that Krishna or Christ would also have to be within this priestcraft or tradition, because the child always has to be around somewhere. And so, of course, we find that people are worshiping Christ thinking that that's a new thing and that they have this, they're being told that they're the chosen ones and they have the only real Christ. But it's all a hoax, because the real Christ was, of course, Krishna, and Krishna was black. And also the thing is about the reason why Krishna is of course, obviously the child that Mary is holding is the Black Madonna. When stylized, the most that they can, into the modern text, the most that they can do to try to hide it was make Krishna blue, which of course is how you see the pictures of Krishna now, where Krishna is blue, because the people had just too many books depicting Krishna as this color, of course, coming from Venus.